Okay, let's get started talking about portrait retouching in Lightroom. There are hours and hours of retouching lessons that you can find, and theories and philosophies in Lightroom and Photoshop and other programs. So we're just going to get started touching lightly on it. But I am going to mention the idea of the different intentions of retouching. Some retouching for portrait work is almost always done. It's very rare that you won't do a little bit of retouching. And for glamour photos, you might get kind of extreme. So with this portrait of Ignacio, which is already quite lovely, I'm going to start with some basic retouching that you might do for any photo, and then go to a little bit of some glamour retouching before we move on to another photo in the next video. So, of course, Nacho is a young, handsome man. He looks great in the photo, and I also have to mention that we did some beautiful light when we actually had him pose for this portrait. This is this very soft Rembrandt-y light with a beautiful hair light on the back. The light itself is very good. The portrait is good. This is pretty much just out of camera. The only thing I've done to it is crop it. So we start with something very strong, and that's actually ideal, of course. So the first thing we want to do with any portrait retouching is we want to look at blemishes or little bits and marks that we want to smooth out. This isn't to say that these are a terrible thing or that we always want to be thinking correctively. It's just that they will usually distract the eye from the features that we want to emphasize. In this case, Nacho has great skin. There's beautiful light, nice eyes and mouth, and we don't want a blemish here and there to actually draw our eyes away from there. So let's go ahead and zoom in and just work with our healing brush on taking out a couple of these blemishes. Not very complicated. Remember though, we're going to be on heal rather than clone. You can experiment with both back and forth. They're only subtly different. Remember, you can adjust the size of your brush either here or on your keyboard. And you want that to be just a little bit bigger than whatever it is that you're correcting. Not too big or you make some strange boo-boos. You also can control the feathering. You definitely want to have some feathering. In this case, I don't want it feathered all the way. I'm going to be at about 70 degrees, 70 feathering. The opacity right now is 100%. There are definitely times when you're doing retouching work where taking the opacity down will be helpful. And at this point, the first few things I'm going to do, I'm going to leave it this way. And then there's one that I'll show you where I'll take the opacity down. So the first one is, of course, this little blemish. Remember that you can move this around in case Lightroom makes a really bad choice, which it shockingly does sometimes. Remember that you can also paint. You don't have to actually do just a click and a dot. Let's see. Well, that's making a pretty good choice today. This one is okay. And I'm just picking up maybe more than you might do, but I'm going to go ahead and grab all these little blemishes. And there we go. Just make these corrections. I'm going to scan through his whole face. Little one here. This is not an offensive mark, but we'll go ahead and just simplify. And of course, his 5 o'clock shadow is part of the charm of the photo, so we'll leave all of that there. You might find little tiny spots like this. And remember that anytime with this particular tool, anytime that you want to go back, you can actually, it's on auto right now, you can grab any tool you want just by selecting it and changing it however you want to do that. Okay, there's one last correction that I want to make here, and that's to this scar here. Now I have mixed feelings about it. If I was doing a more naturalized portrait, I probably would not take this out, but since we're doing glamour, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And this particular one, I have a feeling it will need to take the opacity down just a little bit. Maybe take the feather up, take the size up, and we might have to adjust where it selects its correction from. Because remember, with these tools, they're not making stuff up, they're finding other areas to use. I'll paint over that and let's see how it does. Yeah, it's an interesting spot. Let's actually zoom out a little bit. I'm not sure I would pick that. Let's move it up closer and zoom in. Usually I find if Lightroom chooses something really far away from the original spot, it's a little bit odd. I'm going to just pull it closer. The reason it's not picking something super close is also because, I'm just going to play with the opacity. There we go. The reason it's not pulling it super close is because it doesn't want it to look repeated. So I like that because it's actually, I've left just a little bit of the hint of the scar there. I don't want it to look like we obviously fixed it, but it's pretty much disguised. Okay, so that's basic blemish healing. Now let's actually take a look at a couple of other areas. This is a little bit trickier, but I like his hair light, but I don't like this one little goobery spot. And this can be trickier. I'm going to go back to this brush. I'm going to go to the clone, and I'm going to paint over, let's see, I want the feathering to be pulled down. I'm going to leave the opacity at 100% for now, and I'm going to make the size pretty small because I'm really just trying to get rid of this area. Okay, cool. That actually worked pretty well. I might move it in so it has just that one little hair there so it looks a little natural. Excellent. Okay, and while I'm up there, I'll go ahead and just take out that little dot and that little dot. This one I think I'm going to go ahead and maybe add the hair back in. I'm not sure it's going to let me do that very well. We'll leave it like that. And there we go. So you can see that just brings our eye away from it. I could probably fuss with that some more. Maybe even in Photoshop, I would add some of this area back in just to make it super corrective. Let's actually go ahead. As long as I'm up here, let's go back to that and see what we can do. I'm going to actually just, oops, have to stay out of there, paint over this area and bring it in here. Ooh, it's going to be tricky. It'll be a lot better in Photoshop, but we'll go ahead and try it. And it's more of a disguise. We might have to come back and actually really redo that later. But a little bit better, a little bit less distracting. Now I'm going to come into his ear. We'll go ahead and just clone this out. Make sure my opacity is full up. I'm just taking this little dot out. But more importantly, I'm going to go into a couple of other tools because one of the things that I don't like in this portrait, I'm happy with all of this. I like this hair light, but I don't like the way that backlighting is making his ear look bright red. And I don't like how hot this is on his neck. This is pretty easy to fix. I'm going to go into a local brush. I'm going to zoom into his ear. And I'm going to put the auto mask on. Now this is a little bit tricky because the mask on, because the color is a little bit, let me zero this brush out. The color is close to the color of his ear, but I think we'll still be able to see it. Yeah, so I'm going to paint this mask over the areas that I want to protect. And what I'm trying to get at are the areas that are sort of bright red there. Take that off. And I'm going to do two things. I'm going to desaturate. That's going to be really important. And then I'm also going to come in here and actually just change this color. Just take out the warmth and take out the magenta. Maybe take a little more saturation out. And I think that will do it. Yeah. So we still have that color, but it's much more reduced and a lot less distracting. Now one more new brush. Make sure it's zeroed out. And this one, I'm just going to come into the back of his neck. And again, I'm going to put the overlay on. And got the auto mask on, which is really handy because it means it won't spill over into this area or up into this area. I love auto mask. Remember, it automatically recognizes edges as long as you stay within it. And all I'm going to do here is just take the exposure down. Ooh, that's good. Take the highlights down. Oops, not too much. Maybe the whites, just a tiny bit. And there we go. We don't want to overdo it. If we have, we'll go back. Nope, that's about right. I don't mind this little highlight. I think that's nice. This still needs some work, but overall that's looking good. Okay, let's talk about some more glamour work that we might do. So let's try some of our presets. I'm just going to bring him back here. Fit. There we go. Fit him in. And I'll go back to my brush. Now on the brushes, you're going to see that we actually have some very nice tools that are handy. One of them is Iris Enhance. Now, usually the Iris Enhance, yeah, it brings up the saturation, it brings up the contrast, and what I like to add to my Iris Enhance is a little bit of white. So let's zoom in to the iris, make sure it's the right size. And you can see I'm just going to paint in to the iris, maybe bring those whites up just a tiny bit more, and just make his eyes look a little bit brighter. A little sparklier. Now the other thing, so as soon as, remember that you have to cut a new brush if you're going to do something else. I'm also going to go in, oops, back to the brush, and I want to go into Soften Skin, bring my brush up, and notice this is taking the clarity very far down, and so you can just go into areas where you want to sort of reduce the pore size or reduce the shininess. I don't want to take this everywhere, but I want to take the glow out in areas where it's distracting. Not on his lips. I think that's really good. And this just softens things. I'll go over that area where I took the scar out. Maybe even on his ear, on the neck, and done. So we're starting to get towards something a little bit more glammy. Now, we can do some global adjustments, and this is one thing I have to say in portraits. I think I tend to do my local adjustments first and then my global, because that's where I can actually get into some of the more specialty effects. So one of the things you can do for glamour is just to dehaze, or sorry, to unclarify. Even, ooh, that's a little bit heavy-handed. Even take your dehaze in the opposite direction. And this gets into a little bit more sort of the glamour look. It's a little over the top, but of course, some glamour is over the top. Okay, so that's a little start in ideas about portrait retouching.